First, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak at this event. The title of my presentation is called Thriving Fishers, Thriving Oceans. I love the title Under the Talking Tree because this is where I've heard the stories I'm about to tell. I'm currently on the northwest coast of Madagascar and spent the last week talking to fishers in this very large and beautiful bay called the Bay of Majamba. It's a very complex bay with over 44,000 inhabitants, full of mangrove channels like these, small fishing camps like these, and larger fishing villages. On Sunday, I sat under this tree and listened to some fishers tell their stories of the changing sea, increasing pressures, and changing identity. It's a story all too familiar on this coast of Madagascar. A story about people at the front line of climate change, living with the sea, and people who must go to greater and greater lengths to make a living while they watch the world around them change rapidly. And the ocean they depend on go from something like this to something like this. Around the world, approximately 500 million people depend on small-scale fisheries. These small-scale fisheries look completely different everywhere you go. Even here in Madagascar, it's drastically different up and down the western coast in terms of fishing methods, and the different species they're catching, and the habitats they're exploiting. But the challenges they face are quite similar. Wondering how to make a living with this ever-changing sea. But for the Vezo of Southwest Madagascar, some things haven't changed. The ocean is the lifeblood for many of them. It shapes their identity from an early age. It's their classroom. It's where they work. It's where they make a living. And how they're able to earn money and support their families. However, many of the traditions that once shaped cultural identity and a harmony between the people and the resources they relied on have faded as challenges have surmounted. Many children grow up not knowing of the abundance that once was in these waters, not knowing the stories that were so vital to their previous generations, growing up with a completely different baseline. Small villages in the most remote places have grown almost exponentially, becoming more accessible, drawing more competition, both between small-scale fishers and collectors. And even still, there exists an unfair competition between small-scale fishers and industrial fishers like this. Even more a threat are the weather events, storms like these that threaten the homes and fishing grounds with rising sea levels and rising temperatures. So these fishers have seen their catch of relative abundance with high diversity of large species dwindle. But this is meant to be a hopeful story because the ocean is amazing. It's like magic. It has the ability to regenerate and come back to life if the right people have the right tools to help it. And I've seen it with my own eyes in this area not far from shore, in a small fishing village called Beangulu in southwest Madagascar, where the community decided to close off this area where there were only 4 fish per 100 square meters, and after less than a year, there were 334 fish per 100 square meters, with the community boasting a large amount of spillover and schooling species that hadn't been that close to shore in years coming close to shore. For the past decade, I've lived in southwest Madagascar among small-scale fishers, working for Blue Ventures, a marine conservation organization that puts people first. We support coastal fishers in remote and rural communities to rebuild fisheries, restore ocean life, and build lasting pathways to prosperity. Across more than a dozen countries, BV is partnering with traditional fishers and community organizations to design, scale, strengthen, and sustain fisheries management and conservation at the community level. Blue Ventures brings partners together in networks to advocate for reform and share tools and best practices to support fishing communities across the globe. We live and work with fishers in remote areas to meld the rich traditional knowledge that still exists with scientific knowledge and data, but recognizing that it's not only data that's important, but it's the stories behind the data and the people behind the data and the people who are telling those stories. So we've trained a number of local people to capture those stories and create accessible media that can inspire change. On a much larger scale, we've trained people to collect data on fisheries, to analyze and facilitate discussions around interpreting it. We're working with former fishermen whose traditional knowledge, blended with scientific knowledge, has provided them with an expertise that has changed the way we work. And these fishermen have passed their training on to others up and down the coast, to many now who boast high level of technical capacity to collect data and guide adaptive management in their own communities. They lead participatory habitat mapping with youth and elders to find out what once was and gather the data to understand what is happening now. The majority of these fishers we've trained don't have high school or middle school diplomas, yet what they've been able to accomplish and the traditional knowledge and skills that they've been able to blend together has led to something incredible. It's led to this, something that was common for previous generations, but that many youth haven't seen in their lifetime. Subsequently, this has led to somewhat of a revolution up and down the western coast of Madagascar, inspiring other communities to implement the same type of permanent closures to restore ocean life and bring hope back to fishers, now being able to catch fish close to shore in times of harsh weather and catch schooling species that for decades have only been present in deeper waters. To spread this revolution, we create films and give opportunities to fishers in remote communities to travel to nearby success stories, to talk about their concerns and their efforts to improve their livelihoods and outcomes in the ocean with their peers. Seeing is believing, and these exchanges allow people at the front lines of climate change to see firsthand the successes that others have had in rebuilding fisheries and restoring ocean life. And if you think about why we travel to new places, we do this to see something new. We do this to learn. We often come back completely changed and inspired, refreshed and ready to tackle the challenges that we've left behind back home. And when we get home, we have so many stories to tell. Stories that can inspire others. Stories that can bring us closer to lost traditions. The exchange itself is a story that we capture on film that can support those who have the ability to change the outcomes for their communities. In this case, a future where fishers and oceans can thrive. So thanks so much for the opportunity to speak. And I'll end this presentation with a short film that gives my friend and a fisher from the village of Bangulu a chance to tell his story from his perspective.